Hello, and welcome back. The last hypersensitivity that we're going to cover is going to be the type 4 hypersensitivity. And what's unique about the type 4 sensitivity as opposed to types 1 through 3, there's no antibody involvement, okay? This one is entirely a T-cell mediated response, okay, which kind of sets it apart from types 1 through 3, all right? Our cells involved in the type 4 hypersensitivity, we still have a lymphocyte, all right? Types 1 through 3, our lymphocyte that was involved was a B cell, and B cells are involved in releasing antibodies. This one is either going to be a helper T cell or a cytotoxic T cell as part of the immune response, okay? There are also macrophages that can be involved in the response. Those macrophages release lysozymes, which can contribute to the inflammation associated with a type 4 hypersensitivity, or you can have a mast cell involved, which is going to release histamine as part of that response, okay? So the cells we've got the T cells, we've got the macrophages, we've got the mast cells. Neutrophils are not involved in a type 4 hypersensitivity. And the thing about type 4 hypersensitivities, this tends to be what's known as a delayed response, all right? So typically within 24 hours of contact with whatever the allergen is or the antigen, you'll see a response within 24 hours, most commonly, okay? So some examples of our type 4 hypersensitivity, contact dermatitis, is one example of a type 4 hypersensitivity. So if you've ever had poison ivy, all right, the oils in the plant interact with the epidermis of the skin, and it triggers that type 4 hypersensitivity, okay? So poison ivy is an example. It doesn't just have to be a plant oil, though. It can be things like lotions or detergents that cause the immune system to overreact. And then the other one that can be involved, if you've ever had your hair colored, some people have immune responses to the hair dye associated with getting their hair colored, okay? So with contact dermatitis, you've got something that stimulates the immune response that for the most part is harmless, right? So lotions, detergents don't typically stimulate the immune response, but in some folks they can, all right? And it's going to be the helper T cells that are helper T cells or cytotoxic T cells that are involved with an assist from the macrophages and mast cells. All right. Another example that may be familiar to you as future healthcare providers is going to be a tuberculin hypersensitivity. All right. Or you may be more familiar with this as the TB test, okay? That TB test essentially works to inject a small amount of protein that's associated with the bacteria. There we go. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Okay? And then what happens is anywhere from 48 to 72 hours later, the test is red. So they put, just with a small needle, they take and inject just a little bit of that protein underneath the surface of the skin. You go home, 48 to 72 hours later, you come back and they measure the diameter of the response, okay? So with that, if the individual has been exposed to the bacteria that causes tuberculosis, the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, you'll see a large welt that'll develop. All right? And that large welt is because the individual has memory T cells from an infection associated with the bacteria. All right? The follow-up on this, the individual is going to have a chest x-ray to determine if the infection is active or not. All right? Because what can happen inside our lung tissue, all right? Put the little dots here. This is going to be our Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria, all right? What can happen is that bacteria can thrive in the lung tissue, but what will end up happening, you're going to get some macrophages that want to work to wall off that bacteria to prevent it from spreading, okay? But what that creates then within the lung tissue is something that's known as a granuloma, okay? So you've got cells that essentially wall off the infection in the lung tissue, and that can be seen on an x-ray, all right? So with the granuloma formation, you can have active bacteria, but the person may or may not be actually exhibiting symptoms associated with tuberculosis, all right? But because there's live bacteria inside that granuloma, the individual could still spread the infection, okay? The other thing that can happen with a granuloma is that granuloma can become necrotic, all right? That should be a term that you remember from a previous video. Remember, you've got cells that are damaged and then are dying off and breaking open. And it can cause tissue damage within the lung, okay? So the example that I have with the granuloma, All right, granulomas are associated with a type 4 hypersensitivity in this case. The macrophages build up and kind of encase the infection. That can be seen on an x-ray. And at times you can have, associated with the granuloma, necrosis or necrotic tissue there, okay? The example I use is tuberculosis. There are other types of infections that can cause this type of granuloma hypersensitivity to happen. Tuberculosis is one, leprosy is another, tularemia is another one, okay? But what I want you to take away from the type 4 hypersensitivity, it's T-cell mediated, okay? It's not mediated by antibodies, okay? There is, in the case of type 4 hypersensitivities, also inflammation that is associated with the process, okay? And that inflammation is either a result of the macrophages or the mast cells, okay? Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know.